He could smell the oil before he saw the plane. Captain James Hartwell, 26 years old, stepped out onto the damp English tarmac and stared at the shape waiting in the fog. It wasn't just another flying fortress. It was heavier, uglier, and meaner, a fortress built for war inside war. 16 guns, 11,000 rounds. A bomber turned into a gunship. The men called it the Flying Destroyer. Hartwell just called it trouble. Engines coughed awake. Rain slid across the aluminum skin like sweat. The crew climbed aboard one by one, gunners, engineers, radio men, each carrying the same quiet thought they didn't dare speak. No one had ever flown a machine like this before. 4,000 extra pounds of armor and ammunition meant slower climbs, longer takeoffs, and more fuel burned. Hartwell rubbed his hands on his flight jacket and said softly, "She's too heavy to come home easy." It was May 29th, 1943. The war over Europe had turned into a steel storm. Every daylight bombing run felt like a coin toss between courage and death. That spring alone, the 8th Air Force had lost more than 170 bombers. German fighters tore through returning formations. Without long-range escorts, the fortresses flew back alone, engines shot out, wings burning, men praying. Half of them never reached English soil. So someone in Washington had an idea, bold, desperate, and doomed from the start. If fighters couldn't protect the bombers, then the bombers would protect each other. Engineers stripped a B-17 of its bombs and stuffed it with guns everywhere a man could stand. A machine gun would follow. No payload, no room for mercy. It wasn't built to drop bombs anymore. It was built to kill. They called it the YB-40, a flying fortress that didn't need an escort. At least, that's what they hoped. Hartwell didn't ask for this assignment. He had already survived 42 missions, more than enough for a ticket home, but he volunteered anyway. He wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, one of these crazy inventions might keep other crews alive. The men who climbed aboard that day weren't chasing glory. They were chasing survival for everyone else still flying. At 1:25 p.m., the control tower cleared them for takeoff. Hedgehog, his YB-40, rumbled down the runway, engines straining under the weight. Behind him, 168 fortresses followed, a silver river of thunder heading toward France. Inside the cockpit, the intercom crackled. "Engines 2 and 3 holding steady, Captain." Hartwell nodded. He didn't trust the calm. By the time they reached the French coast, the sky had turned against them. Flak burst in black blossoms, the radio filled with static and clipped voices. Bandits climbing from Rennes, multiple contacts. The crew tightened harnesses. Sweat mixed with oil and gunpowder. They had practiced this moment for months, but training doesn't prepare a man for the smell of fear in recycled oxygen. 6 German fighters appeared out of the sun. The first dove, straight at them, a streak of black and silver. The nose turret opened fire, tracers glowing like falling stars. For a heartbeat, the air lit up in orange. The German rolled away, trailing smoke. Cheers burst over the intercom. It worked. The fortress could fight back. For 6 minutes, the YB-40 became a wall of lead in the sky. But war never lets victory last long. Hartwell looked out and saw the rest of the formation pulling away. Smaller, faster, lighter. He pushed the throttles to the limit. The airspeed needle barely moved. 148 miles per hour. The Standard bombers were already at 160. They were alone. And in 1943, being alone over France was a death sentence. The engineer's voice cracked over the headset. "Number 3, cylinder temps in the red." "Pull it back," Hartwell ordered. The engines groaned like beasts chained to the air. Fuel gauges fell faster than planned. Every minute meant one less to get home. No enemy fire yet, but the weight itself was killing them. Then came the real attack. 3 Focke-Wulfs from different angles, high, low, and dead ahead. "Hold your fire." "Track right, fire." The sky exploded. Spent casings rained inside the fuselage. 8 guns roaring at once turned the airframe into a trembling drum. A German fighter disintegrated in front of them, another broke off. But one got through. A 20mm shell tore through the right wing, severing a hydraulic line. Red fluid sprayed across the waist windows like blood. The gunner shouted, "We've lost hydraulics on the landing gear." Nobody answered. They were 8 miles behind the main group now. No escort, no cover, only the drone of their own engines and the distant echo of death ahead. Hartwell clenched the yoke. He could feel the vibration of every bullet hole through the metal frame. The fortress that was supposed to protect others had become its own trap, a beautiful, armored mistake. Hours later, they would limp back to England, shaking, leaking, half broken. And when Colonel Reed asked for Hartwell's report, the captain said only 3 words that ended an entire dream. "It can't keep up." By late afternoon, the YB-42s were no longer an escort formation. They were a trail of stragglers. 7 gunships had launched from Alconbury that morning. By 4 p.m., every one of them was behind. Each one heavy, slow, and alone. In war, distance is death, measured in miles. Somewhere over occupied France, another YB-40 appeared below Hartwell's wing. Captain Richard Hayes, flying aircraft number 42 to 5,741. His engines were running hot, one coughing black smoke. Hartwell's voice crackled over the radio. "Form up tight, Richard. 2 birds are harder to kill than 1. Together they limped west toward the English Channel, 2 steel giants bleeding fuel, dragging 4 tons of extra armor across hostile skies. German fighters circled like vultures, waiting, watching. The Luftwaffe pilots had already learned the truth about the YB-40. They didn't fear it, they hunted it. From above, the gunship looked different from the standard fortresses. Extra turrets, no bomb bay doors, a bulkier shape. Every German pilot could pick them out instantly. And why waste ammunition on bombers that could run when you could tear apart the one that couldn't? The flying destroyer had become the perfect bait. 2 Messerschmitts dove from high 6 o'clock. The tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Raymond Kayak, shouted into the intercom, "Bandits closing, 400 yards." The sky filled with tracers again, orange streaks slicing upward. For a moment, it looked like Hartwell might shake them. Then, cannon fire erupted. A 20mm shell tore through the tail section. Another exploded near the stabilizer. Metal screamed. The aircraft shuddered violently. Control cables rattled under Hartwell's boots. He fought the yoke. It felt like steering through mud. Morrison, the flight engineer, climbed back to check the damage. His voice came back thin and trembling. "Elevator's jammed, sir. Trim's gone. You'll have to muscle her all the way home." Hartwell didn't answer. He just nodded to himself. Minutes stretched into hours. Fuel dwindled. Engines overheated. Every vibration felt like the next disaster waiting to happen. Then, salvation. 4 P-47 Thunderbolts appeared from the northeast, sunlight flashing on their wings. They dove straight at the Messerschmitts. The German fighters peeled away instantly, disappearing into cloud. The American escorts wagged their wings and fell into formation beside the crippled bombers. No words were exchanged. None were needed. For the first time that day, the men aboard Hedgehog could breathe. But the victory was hollow. The concept itself had failed. They reached England, barely on fumes. Manual cranks lowered the landing gear one side, locked just seconds before touchdown. When the wheels finally hit Alconbury's runway, the entire crew sat in silence. No cheers, no relief, just exhaustion. Ground crews counted 16 bullet holes, a severed hydraulic line, a jammed trim tab, and one truth too heavy to ignore. The fortress built to protect others couldn't even save itself. Colonel William Reed met Hartwell on the tarmac, clipboard in hand. He didn't ask about the men, he wanted the data. How did she perform? Hartwell's answer became the program's obituary. "It can't keep up." Those 4 words ended the dream faster than any German bullet could. But the Army Air Forces didn't give up easily. They called it an anomaly. 7 more YB-40 missions followed. June 5th, all 4 fell behind. June 22nd, 1 shot down. 10 returned hours late. June 28th, 6 flew again. All 6 left alone over France for nearly an hour. One after another, the reports told the same story. The gunship couldn't climb, couldn't chase, couldn't return. And yet, each crew climbed back in anyway. Orders were orders. By the third mission, morale was slipping. Gunners joked darkly that they were flying targets with better views. One wrote in his diary, "Feels strange to hope for clouds." They knew that if the Luftwaffe spotted them, there would be no help, no cover, no chance. And still they flew, because someone had to test the dream. At the maintenance depots back in England, engineers tore the gunships apart, searching for fixes. They shifted ammunition racks, adjusted center of gravity, rewired the power to turrets. Nothing worked. The math was unforgiving. A standard B-17 weighed 65,000 pounds on takeoff, 48,000 after dropping bombs. The YB-40 took off at 68,000, and after combat, it still weighed 64. You can't out-engineer gravity with courage. When the final report came through in August 1943, General Karl Spaatz read it, signed his name, and quietly ended the program. 12 aircraft, 3 months, one dead dream. But for the men who flew it, it wasn't just an experiment. It was a promise that turned into a burden. Hartwell would later say, "We thought we were building a guardian angel. Instead, we built a coffin with wings." Yet even in failure, the YB-40 left something behind. A spark inside the wreckage that would save more lives than anyone aboard could imagine. The story wasn't over. It was only beginning. When the YB-40 seconds were finally grounded, the airfields fell quiet. The hangars smelled of burnt oil and broken dreams. 12 gunships sat lined up under gray skies, their metal skins pitted, their gun barrels rusted black. For most men, that's where the story would have ended. But somewhere in Ohio, a group of engineers were reading the combat reports and saw something no one else did. At Wright Field, the Army Air Force's Engineering Division dissected the YB-40 like a failed experiment, frame by frame, mission by mission. They didn't see disaster. They saw data. Every malfunction, every bullet hole, every field modification told a story. Buried in the wreckage was one design feature that had performed flawlessly: the chin turret. In every report, gunners mentioned the same thing. No frontal attacks succeeded. Before the YB-40, German fighters had exploited a deadly blind spot, the 12 o'clock high approach. B-17 seconds couldn't aim their nose guns upward fast enough to stop head-on attacks. But the YB-40's Bendix chin turret, controlled from the bombardier's position, erased that weakness completely. 2. 50 caliber Brownings could now sweep the sky ahead like a blade. One test officer wrote, "For all its faults, the YB-40's chin guns make frontal attack suicide." It was a revelation born in tragedy. The rest of the airframe had failed, but this small mechanical miracle had saved multiple crews. And for engineers, one working idea was worth every failed concept that surrounded it. They sent the blueprint straight to Boeing. By September 1943, Boeing had refined and standardized the Bendix turret for production. They called it the Model A. 2 forward guns, remote control, electric traverse, and a new sense of confidence for crews who'd once feared frontal attacks. Within months, the turret appeared on a new generation of flying fortresses, the B-17G. That G would change everything. Combat reports from late 1943 told a different story. On missions over Germany, bomber losses from frontal attacks dropped by more than 70%. Entire squadrons that once dreaded 12 o'clock high were now fighting back. One pilot from the 91st Bomb Group said, "The chin turret gave us teeth where we used to have only prayers." The innovation born from failure had begun to save lives, thousands of them. The YB-40 was never celebrated. It wasn't painted on posters or remembered in museums. But every B-17G that thundered across the European sky carried a piece of it, that small, stubborn idea that refused to die. From 12 failed airframes came 8,680 successors, each one stronger, faster, more lethal. Each one owed its survival to a weapon designed by a ghost. By VE Day in 1945, the B-17G had flown over 290,000 combat sorties. Historians estimate that the chin turret alone prevented 2,300 bomber losses. That's roughly 23,000 airmen who lived to come home. All because one failed gunship taught engineers where to put two guns. But the YB-40's gifts didn't stop there. Engineers borrowed its staggered waist gun positions, allowing gunners to move freely without colliding mid-fight. They copied its Cheyenne tail turret, giving tail gunners a wider field of view and more armor. 3 features, born in a plane that never worked, would define the final, most successful model of the Flying Fortress. When Hartwell returned to Alconbury months later as a training officer, he found new crews gathering around their shiny B-17Gs, pointing at the new chin turret with curiosity. One young bombardier asked, "Sir, where'd this thing come from?" Hartwell smiled, tracing the cold metal barrel with his gloved hand. "From a ship that couldn't keep up," he said. "We built something that failed so badly, it taught us how to win. In war, success has many fathers, but failure usually dies alone. Yet sometimes, a failure leaves a trail, not of shame, but of progress." The YB-40 never made it into history books, but its lessons were written into every mission that followed, every pilot who came home, every family that didn't get a telegram. By the end of 1943, most YB-42s were scrapped or converted back into trainers. None survived the war. None sit in museums today. But if you walk through the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, you'll see a B-17G named Shoo 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 Baby. Its nose turret gleams under museum lights. The plaque mentions standard equipment. It doesn't mention the YB-40. History forgets the machines that failed, but it never escapes what they taught us. The YB-40 was a coffin that carried the seed of survival, a fortress that couldn't fly fast enough to save itself, but fast enough to save thousands who came after. And that's the strange mercy of war. Sometimes, the things that die first save the ones that follow. When the war finally ended, Europe fell silent. The sky, once filled with thunder, became empty again. The last B-17 seconds limped home, their wings patched, their paint faded. Most crews never knew that the guns in their noses, the very ones that had saved them, were born from a bomber that never worked. Captain James Hartwell survived his tour. He went home to Pennsylvania in late 1943, married his sweetheart, and worked at a machine shop after the war. He rarely spoke about the YB-40. To most, it was just another failed project, buried in paperwork and forgotten hangars. But those who served with him remembered a man who never stopped teaching, especially about what failure can give back. That December, Hartwell returned to RAF Alconbury as an instructor. The first B-17Gs had arrived. Young crews gathered around the gleaming turrets, pointing at the forward guns, the staggered waist positions, the redesigned tail. One of them asked, "Sir, is it true these came from that old escort experiment?" Hartwell smiled, touching the chin turret. "Yeah, she couldn't keep up, but she kept us all alive." Not everyone was that lucky. Of the original 12 YB-40 crews, only half completed their rotations. Some went down over France. Some vanished into the sea. Their names didn't make headlines. But every time a B-17G returned home safe, their ghosts rode with it. Silent proof that failure still has value. Today, one of those legacies still stands in Dayton, Ohio. Inside the National Museum of the United States Air Force, a restored B-17. G, tail number 44-83514, sits polished under bright lights. Visitors walk past the nose turret, read the plaque that calls it standard equipment. They take photos, smile, and move on. No one mentions the YB-40. No one remembers the crews who tested it. But their fingerprints are everywhere on that machine. History remembers victories. It carves their names into marble, prints their numbers into textbooks. But the truth is quieter. Progress doesn't come from perfection. It comes from people willing to fail, to test what shouldn't work, to carry the extra weight even when it breaks them. The YB-40 was one of those burdens. Every engineer, every pilot, every soldier who ever risked something new owes a small debt to machines like this. They remind us that progress isn't born from success, but from the courage to learn why we failed. Because sometimes the wreckage of one dream is the foundation of another. The YB-40 was heavy, slow, and doomed. A flying contradiction. But from its broken wings came innovations that saved thousands. The chin turret, the staggered guns, the redesigned tail. 3 ideas that turned failure into salvation. Hartwell once said to a young pilot, "The best teacher in war is the one that doesn't survive it." Those words stayed with the men who heard them. Today, aviation designers and historians still study the YB-40, not as a success, but as an early lesson in over-engineering, in the limits of power, and in the stubborn hope that maybe one more gun, one more inch of armor, could make a man invincible. It never did, but it taught us how to build smarter, not just stronger. Every innovation has a graveyard behind it. Every safe landing has a story written in blood. The YB-40's story is not about defeat. It's about transformation. How courage, even misplaced, can lead to something greater. It can't keep up. But the world kept moving because it tried. If this story moved you, help us keep these memories alive. Like this video so more people can hear the names time forgot. Subscribe to join us as we rescue the stories buried beneath the victories, because every forgotten plane, every nameless crew, every failed experiment deserves to be remembered.